A Missouri lawmaker is hoping to put regulations on a substance nicknamed gas station heroin. Kratom and 7-OH products are widely available at smoke shops and gas stations across Missouri and are unregulated in many states. WGEM Missouri Capitol Bureau reporter Hannah Falcon explains the potential effects of the bill.
There is a lot of concern about 7-OH.
7-hydroxymetrogenin, or 7-OH, is a derivative of the plant kratom, created by isolating compounds in the plant to make it more potent. It's available in gas stations and smoke shops across Missouri, but not regulated. Kansas City Senator Maggie Nurenberg hopes to change that with a bill that would ban the manufacturing and sale of many synthetically created or altered 7-OH kratom drugs.
Biggest concerns that I've heard from my constituents is the availability of 7-OH at gas stations and smoke shops.
Family medicine Dr. Luke Buffalo explains the effects kratom or 7-OH products have on a person.
It has some stimulant effects similar to what caffeine does, but the reason we get concerned about it is that it also has opioid-like effects, so similar to what we see with heroin and fentanyl.
7-OH really is like gas station crack.
Nurenberg's bill, as is, would force businesses like American Shaman in Kansas City out of Missouri.
This isn't gas station heroin, it's anything but. It's the answer to heroin.
In an interview earlier this week, we asked CBD American Shaman founder Vince Sanders about the legal issues his company faces.
We're not going to take something off the market unless we have to. Not as long as it's helping people.
The Kansas City-based manufacturer creates 7-OH products, but he's faced pushback from the city, state, and federal government.
I'd love to work with the Attorney General, with the Department of Health and Senior Services, with anybody who's interested to make sure that that people are safe.
Nurenberg pre-filed her bill this week for the state legislative session beginning January 7th. Reporting in Jefferson City, I'm Hannah Falcon, WGEM News.